Jimin, don't leave. Jungkook's voice shook so badly that even the members standing outside the dorm room froze in silence. His eyes were red, his hands trembling, and then he said the one thing nobody expected to hear. I still love TAEHYUNG. The room went completely silent. Jimin didn't answer. He just stared at Jungkook as if something inside him had finally broken after months of pretending he was fine. RM looked away first. Jin clenched his jaw. Suga lowered his head. Nobody knew what to say, but what happened next was even worse. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If you were Jimin, what would you do after hearing those words? Would you stay, or would you walk away forever? And before this story begins, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today, because this might be one of the most emotional BTS drama stories you've ever heard. For months, everyone believed Jimin and Jungkook were finally okay. The arguments had stopped, the distance between them seemed gone. The members thought the worst was behind them. But they didn't know Jungkook had been hiding a secret that grew heavier every single day. A secret connected to TAEHYUNG. A secret powerful enough to destroy friendships, loyalty, and trust inside BTS. And the moment that secret finally came out, Jimin made a decision so unexpected that it left every member speechless. What nobody realized was that Jimin had been hiding a secret of his own. And by the end of that night, nothing between Jimin, Jungkook, and TAEHYUNG would ever be the same again.
Nobody moved after Jungkook's confession. The silence inside the dorm felt heavier than any argument they had ever experienced. Jimin stood across from him, his expression unreadable, while Jungkook struggled to keep his breathing steady. RM wanted to say something, anything, but every word felt wrong. Jin looked toward the floor. Suga leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, already sensing the situation was far more complicated than anyone understood. J-Hope kept glancing between Jimin and Jungkook, hoping one of them would finally break the tension. Instead, Jimin slowly nodded once, just once. Then he turned around and walked toward the door. Nobody expected him to leave without saying a single word. Jimin Jungkook called immediately. His voice cracked. Jimin stopped for a second but never looked back. I need some air. That was all he said before walking out. The door closed behind him. Jungkook felt his chest tighten instantly because the truth was that he had imagined dozens of possible reactions. Anger, yelling tears, accusations. But not this, not silence. Silence felt worse, much worse. The members remained frozen until our finally exhaled. Jungkook began carefully. What exactly did you mean? Jungkook lowered his head. He had asked himself the same question every day for months. What did he mean? What was he really feeling? And why had he chosen tonight to finally say it out loud? He couldn't answer, not honestly, because the truth was buried beneath months of guilt, confusion, and memories he had tried desperately to ignore. Outside, cold air hit Jimin's face as he stepped onto the empty rooftop. The city lights stretched endlessly before him, but he barely noticed them. His hands were shaking. Not because Jungkook still loved TAEHYUNG. That wasn't the part hurting him. The part hurting him was realizing he had known all along. Deep down, he had always known every time Jungkook suddenly became distant. Every time he avoided certain conversations. Every time TAEHYUNG's name entered a room and Jungkook's entire mood changed. Jimin had noticed everything. He just chose to ignore it because accepting the truth felt impossible. He leaned against the railing and closed his eyes. But the memories came back immediately. 3 months earlier, the beginning of everything. Back then, BTS had just finished an exhausting schedule overseas. Everyone was tired. Everyone wanted rest. Yet Jungkook seemed different, distracted, restless, constantly checking his phone, constantly disappearing when nobody was paying attention. Jimin noticed it first. Of course he did. He always noticed Jungkook. At first he assumed it was stress. Then he assumed it was exhaustion. Then he started noticing something stranger. Every time TAEHYUNG sent a message, Jungkook's expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Enough for Jimin to notice. Enough for him to start asking questions he didn't want answers to. The first real warning came during a late-night dinner. The members were laughing together, sharing stories, relaxing for the first time in weeks. Then TAEHYUNG mentioned an old memory from years ago. Something small, something harmless, but Jungkook smiled immediately. A genuine smile, the kind Jimin hadn't seen from him in months. That moment stayed with Jimin long after everyone forgot about it. Because it wasn't the smile itself, it was what happened afterward. Jungkook spent the rest of the night unusually quiet, staring at nothing, lost somewhere far away. As if TAEHYUNG's words had unlocked a door inside him. A door he had spent years trying to keep closed. Back on the rooftop, Jimin opened his eyes again. He remembered every detail now, every warning sign, every moment he had chosen not to confront. And maybe that was his mistake. Maybe pretending everything was okay had only delayed the inevitable. Behind him, the rooftop door opened. He already knew who it was before turning around. "I figured I'd find you here," Suga said calmly. Jimin forced a weak smile. "You always do." Suga stepped beside him. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Suga looked toward the city lights. "Did you know?" Jimin laughed bitterly. "Not officially." Suga nodded slowly. "Same." The answer surprised Jimin. "You knew too?" "Not everything," Suga admitted, "but enough." Jimin looked at him carefully. "Then why didn't you say anything?" Suga's expression darkened. "Because some truths only hurt more when someone else says them first." Jimin fell silent. The words hit harder than expected, because they sounded exactly like something he would have told himself, exactly like the excuse he had been using for months. Meanwhile, downstairs, JUNGKOOK sat alone in the living room after the other members finally left him. Nobody knew how to help him. Nobody knew what to say. His thoughts kept replaying the same moment over and over. "I still love TAEHYUNG." The sentence sounded worse every time he remembered saying it aloud, because it wasn't the whole truth, not even close. There was something much deeper he hadn't told anyone. Something that would explain everything. Something that would make tonight even more painful. JUNGKOOK buried his face in his hands. He remembered the night everything started, the night TAEHYUNG unknowingly changed his life forever. And as those memories returned, JUNGKOOK realized the real disaster wasn't his confession. The real disaster was the secret he still hadn't told Jimin. JUNGKOOK couldn't stop thinking about that night. No matter how hard he tried, the memory always came back. It had happened nearly a year earlier, long before anyone suspected there was a problem. BTS had finished a long schedule and everyone was exhausted. Most of the members went straight to their rooms, but JUNGKOOK couldn't sleep. His mind was restless, too many thoughts, too many expectations. Too much pressure, so he wandered through the building alone until he noticed a light still on in one of the practice rooms. Curious, he opened the door and found TAEHYUNG sitting on the floor. No music, no phone, no distractions, just silence. TAEHYUNG looked up and smiled. "Can't sleep either." JUNGKOOK remembered nodding before sitting beside him. At first, neither said much. Then somehow the conversation became deeper than either of them expected. They talked about pressure, fear, loneliness, the things idols rarely admitted out loud. TAEHYUNG spoke honestly, more honestly than JUNGKOOK had ever heard before. He talked about feeling left behind sometimes, about watching people change while pretending everything remained the same. JUNGKOOK listened for hours, and somewhere during that conversation, something shifted. It wasn't romance, it wasn't even attraction. It was recognition. For the first time in a long time, JUNGKOOK felt understood, completely understood. That feeling stayed with him long after the conversation ended. Weeks became months. They spent more time together. Not intentionally. It just happened naturally. Shared schedules, late-night conversations, random messages, small moments nobody else noticed. But JUNGKOOK noticed all of them, every single one. At first he thought nothing of it. Then he started looking forward to those moments. Then he started depending on them. And that's when things became dangerous, because while JUNGKOOK was growing closer to TAEHYUNG, someone else was quietly getting hurt. Jimin. The realization came far too late. One evening, Jimin invited JUNGKOOK to dinner, just the two of them. Something they used to do all the time. JUNGKOOK agreed immediately, but halfway through the meal, his phone vibrated. A message from TAEHYUNG. Nothing important, just a joke. Yet JUNGKOOK smiled automatically. Jimin noticed. He didn't say anything. He simply looked away for a moment. A tiny moment. Barely noticeable, but JUNGKOOK remembered it perfectly, because that was the first time guilt appeared. The first time he realized his attention was drifting somewhere else. The first time he understood someone might get hurt because of it. Back in the present, JUNGKOOK stared at the dark ceiling above him. His chest felt tight, because none of this was supposed to happen. He never intended to hurt Jimin, never intended to create distance, yet somehow it happened anyway. Upstairs on the rooftop, Suga continued, standing beside Jimin. The wind had grown colder, neither seemed eager to leave. "Do you hate him?" Suga suddenly asked. Jimin laughed quietly. "You really go straight to the hardest questions. That's not an answer." Jimin looked toward the city again. "No." The answer came immediately. Too immediately. "I don't hate him." Suga nodded. "I didn't think so." Jimin swallowed hard. That's the problem. Because if he hated JUNGKOOK, everything would be easier. Anger was simple. Anger created distance. Anger gave people reasons to walk away. But what was he supposed to do when the person hurting him was also the person he cared about most? That was much harder, much more painful. Suga studied him carefully. "Then what are you going to do?" Jimin didn't answer because he honestly didn't know. His emotions were a mess. Hurt, confusion, jealousy, fear. But beneath all of that was something else, something darker. A secret he had never shared with anyone, not even JUNGKOOK, especially not JUNGKOOK. The truth was that months ago, JIMIN had discovered something by accident, something involving TAEHYUNG, something JUNGKOOK still didn't know. And ever since then, JIMIN had been carrying that secret alone, protecting everyone, including JUNGKOOK. The burden became heavier every day, yet he never spoke about it, because once that truth came out, there would be no going back. Meanwhile, inside the dorm, RM sat in the kitchen with Jin and J-Hope. Nobody felt like sleeping anymore. The atmosphere was too tense, too uncertain. "This is bad," J-Hope admitted quietly. Jin sighed. "Worse than bad." RM remained silent. He was thinking, connecting pieces. Looking back at moments that suddenly made much more sense, then a realization struck him, a memory. Small, but important. Several weeks ago, he had accidentally overheard an argument between TAEHYUNG and JUNGKOOK. At the time, he ignored it. Friends argued all the time. But now he remembered certain words, certain emotions, certain reactions. The argument had sounded personal. Much more personal than he originally believed. RM frowned. Something wasn't adding up. If JUNGKOOK truly loved TAEHYUNG, why had TAEHYUNG looked so uncomfortable around him recently? Why had they seemed more distant than ever? The timeline didn't make sense, the emotions didn't make sense, which meant someone was hiding something. Somewhere inside this situation was another truth, a bigger truth, one nobody had uncovered yet. Across the city, TAEHYUNG sat alone in his apartment staring at his phone. He had already received dozens of missed calls, messages, notifications. He ignored all of them because he knew exactly what had happened. He knew what JUNGKOOK had confessed, and he knew the fallout had already begun. Slowly, TAEHYUNG closed his eyes. Regret washed over him immediately, not because of JUNGKOOK's feelings, not because of JIMIN's pain, but because of a decision he made months ago. A decision he thought would protect everyone. A decision that had quietly created the disaster unfolding tonight. His phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from JIMIN, only 4 words. "We need to talk." TAEHYUNG stared at the screen for several long seconds. His heartbeat quickened. Because if JIMIN wanted to talk now, it meant something had changed, something serious. And TAEHYUNG had a terrible feeling that the secret both of them had been hiding was finally about to come into the light. For several long seconds, neither JIMIN nor TAEHYUNG spoke. The river behind them moved quietly through the darkness while the city lights reflected. Across the water, usually the view felt peaceful. Tonight it felt cold, uncomfortable, heavy with things neither of them wanted to say out loud. JIMIN kept his eyes fixed on TAEHYUNG, waiting. The question was still hanging between them. How much longer were you planning to hide it from him? TAEHYUNG finally exhaled slowly. As long as possible. JIMIN looked away immediately, not because he was surprised, because he wasn't. Deep down he had expected that answer. Still, hearing it aloud made the situation feel much more real. "That's not a solution," JIMIN said quietly. "I know. Then why?" TAEHYUNG hesitated. His expression darkened. "Because every other option hurts him." JIMIN laughed bitterly. "And this doesn't?" Neither answered. The silence itself became the answer. Both knew the damage had already begun months ago. They simply disagreed about when it started. JIMIN thought the damage started the moment they chose secrecy. TAEHYUNG believed it started the moment JUNGKOOK developed feelings he could never fully return. Somewhere between those 2 points, everything had fallen apart. TAEHYUNG leaned against the railing and lowered his head. "You think I wanted this?" he asked quietly. "You think any of this was easy?" JIMIN remained silent. TAEHYUNG continued before he could respond. "Every time I saw him trying to get closer, I felt guilty. Every time he looked at me like I mattered more than I should, I felt guilty. Every time I pulled away, I felt guilty." His voice grew weaker. There was no right choice. JIMIN wanted to argue, wanted to blame someone, anyone. But he couldn't. Because TAEHYUNG wasn't wrong, the situation had never been simple. That's what made it so painful. Nobody intended to hurt anyone. Yet everyone ended up hurt anyway. Across town, JUNGKOOK sat in his car gripping the steering wheel. He had left the dorm without telling anyone. The mysterious message kept replaying inside his head. "Tell JIMIN the truth before someone else does." His stomach twisted every time he remembered it. Because the message wasn't wrong. The truth had been buried long enough. The problem was that JUNGKOOK wasn't sure he could survive JIMIN's reaction once everything came out. His hands tightened around the wheel. Memories flooded back instantly. 1 year earlier, a recording studio. A decision he regretted every day afterward. It happened during one of the most stressful periods of his career. BTS was under enormous pressure. Expectations were everywhere. Every performance, every appearance, every project felt bigger than the last. JUNGKOOK carried that pressure quietly. He rarely complained, rarely showed weakness. But eventually, everyone reaches a limit. His limit came one night after a particularly difficult schedule. Exhausted and overwhelmed, he accepted an offer he should have refused. An opportunity, a project, a commitment. At the time, it seemed harmless, necessary even. But there was one condition attached to it. One condition he never told the members about, especially not JIMIN. The memory made JUNGKOOK close his eyes. Even now, thinking about it filled him with guilt. Because that decision had started a chain reaction that nobody understood. Not even TAEHYUNG, not even JIMIN, the feelings, the distance, the misunderstandings, they were all connected to something much bigger, something nobody had discovered yet. Back by the river, JIMIN suddenly looked at TAEHYUNG. There's something else, isn't there? TAEHYUNG froze. The reaction lasted less than a second, but JIMIN noticed. He always noticed TAEHYUNG. His voice became firmer. What aren't you telling me? TAEHYUNG immediately looked away. Wrong move. The moment he did that, JIMIN knew his instincts were right. Another secret existed, another missing piece. How long? JIMIN asked. TAEHYUNG didn't answer. How long have you been hiding something from me too? Still no answer. JIMIN felt frustration rising inside him. Not because of betrayal, because of exhaustion. He was tired of half-truths, tired of secrets, tired of everyone deciding what information he deserved to know. I'm asking you directly. TAEHYUNG swallowed hard. A few months. JIMIN stared at him. A few months? TAEHYUNG nodded slowly. The admission hit harder than expected. Because if TAEHYUNG had been hiding something for months, then everything JIMIN believed about this situation might be incomplete. Worse, it might be completely wrong. Before JIMIN could ask another question, TAEHYUNG's phone suddenly rang. Both men looked down. The caller ID displayed JUNGKOOK's name. Neither moved. The phone continued vibrating, ring after ring after ring. Finally, it stopped. Seconds later, it rang again. JUNGKOOK. Again, TAEHYUNG looked conflicted. JIMIN's expression hardened. Answer it! TAEHYUNG hesitated. JIMIN! Answer it. Slowly, TAEHYUNG accepted the call. He lifted the phone to his ear. JUNGKOOK! What came through the speaker immediately erased all emotion from TAEHYUNG's face. JIMIN noticed instantly. What's wrong? JIMIN asked. TAEHYUNG didn't respond. He was listening, his eyes widening more with every passing second. Then JUNGKOOK said something that made TAEHYUNG go completely silent. Several moments passed. Finally, TAEHYUNG whispered one sentence. How long have you known? JIMIN's heart dropped immediately. Because whatever JUNGKOOK had just revealed clearly changed everything. Across town, JUNGKOOK sat alone in the darkness of his parked car. His breathing was uneven. His hands shook. Because for the first time in a year, he had finally stopped running. I know everything, he told TAEHYUNG. Silence followed. Then JUNGKOOK spoke again. And if JIMIN hears it from someone else before he hears it from me, I'm going to lose him forever. TAEHYUNG closed his eyes. JIMIN stood frozen beside him. Neither understood exactly what JUNGKOOK meant yet, but both suddenly realized the same terrifying possibility. The secret they had been focused on all night might not be the most dangerous secret in this story. And if JUNGKOOK was telling the truth, the real disaster hadn't happened yet. It was only beginning. The moment the call ended, the atmosphere beside the river changed completely. JIMIN could feel it. TAEHYUNG could feel it. Whatever JUNGKOOK had just revealed was serious enough to erase every other conversation they had been having. For several seconds, TAEHYUNG simply stared at the dark screen of his phone. JIMIN watched him carefully. What did he mean? TAEHYUNG didn't answer immediately. That silence alone made JIMIN more nervous. TAEHYUNG. This time his voice carried a warning. What did he mean? TAEHYUNG slowly lifted his head. His expression looked troubled in a way JIMIN had rarely seen before. I think we've been looking at the wrong problem. JIMIN frowned. What does that mean? TAEHYUNG took a deep breath. I think JUNGKOOK's feelings for me were never the biggest secret. The words landed heavily between them. JIMIN felt his heartbeat quicken, because deep down he had already started suspecting the same thing. Too many things weren't adding up. Too many reactions felt disconnected from the explanation they had accepted. If JUNGKOOK simply loved TAEHYUNG, why did he seem terrified tonight? Heartbroken, yes. Emotional, yes. But terrified, that was different. Fear usually belonged to people hiding something. JIMIN folded his arms. Then what is he hiding? TAEHYUNG looked away toward the river. I don't know. JIMIN immediately knew he was lying. Not completely, but enough. You know something. TAEHYUNG remained silent. How much? Still silence. JIMIN felt frustration building again. Everyone keeps deciding what I should and shouldn't know. His voice sharpened. I'm tired of it. TAEHYUNG finally nodded. Slowly, reluctantly, months ago, JUNGKOOK asked me something. JIMIN waited. What? TAEHYUNG hesitated. The memory clearly made him uncomfortable. He asked me what I would do if someone betrayed the people they cared about for. What they believed was a good reason. JIMIN's expression changed instantly. What? TAEHYUNG nodded. At the time, I thought it was hypothetical. And now? TAEHYUNG swallowed hard. Now I'm not so sure. Back inside the city, JUNGKOOK drove through nearly empty streets without any destination. His thoughts were racing too fast to focus. The truth was closing in from every direction. The message, the call, the secrets, everything was finally catching up to him. He had spent an entire year convincing himself he could control the situation, convincing himself he could protect everyone, convincing himself the consequences would never arrive. Now they were here. Worse than he imagined, a memory surfaced again. one he usually forced himself to avoid. The day he signed the agreement, the day everything changed. It happened inside a private office. Quiet. Professional. At the time, Jungkook believed he was making a responsible decision, a necessary decision, something that would help BTS in the future, something that would reduce pressure on the people he cared about. He never intended to keep it secret forever, only temporarily, just until everything became stable, just until the timing felt right. But temporary secrets have a dangerous habit of becoming permanent. 1 month became 2, 2 became 6, then a year passed. By then, telling the truth felt impossible. Every day he delayed it, the consequences grew larger. The guilt grew heavier, until eventually the secret became part of his life, part of who he was, a burden he carried everywhere. Jungkook tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "I should have told him." The words escaped before he realized he was speaking aloud. He should have told Jimin from the beginning. Maybe Jimin would have been angry, maybe disappointed, but at least the betrayal wouldn't feel this large now. Meanwhile, back at the dorm, sat awake in the living room, reviewing old memories in his head. The more he thought about recent months, the more strange details started connecting together. Jungkook disappearing unexpectedly, unexplained meetings, sudden changes in plans, mysterious phone calls he never discussed. At the time, nobody questioned it. BTS members respected each other's privacy. They didn't demand explanations for every personal decision, but now RM was beginning to wonder if that trust had created blind spots. Maybe everyone missed something important. Maybe they had been looking in the wrong direction all along. His phone suddenly vibrated. A message from Jimin, "Need to talk tomorrow, urgent." RM stared at the message. The word urgent immediately caught his attention. He replied instantly, "Is everyone okay?" Several moments passed before Jimin answered. No, felt a chill run through him. That single word confirmed his worst fear. The situation was escalating. Fast, back at the river, Jimin and TAEHYUNG had moved to a nearby bench. The conversation was becoming more complicated with every passing minute. "Tell me everything," Jimin said. TAEHYUNG laughed quietly. Not because anything was funny, because he was exhausted. "I don't even know where to start." "Start with the truth." Another silence followed. Finally, TAEHYUNG nodded. Jungkook wasn't the only one hiding things. Jimin's stomach tightened. "What does that mean?" TAEHYUNG looked directly at him. "It means I made mistakes too." Jimin didn't interrupt. "I thought I was protecting him." TAEHYUNG continued. "I thought keeping certain information from him would spare him pain." His voice lowered. "Instead, I made everything worse." Jimin stared at him carefully. The guilt in TAEHYUNG's eyes looked real, deeply real. Whatever he was hiding clearly haunted him. Then TAEHYUNG said something unexpected. "Do you remember the meeting in Tokyo last year?" Jimin frowned immediately. Of course he remembered. It was an ordinary business trip, or at least everyone thought it was ordinary. What about it? TAEHYUNG's expression darkened. Jungkook wasn't where he said he was that night. Jimin felt his heartbeat stop, because he remembered that trip perfectly. He remembered Jungkook disappearing for several hours. He remembered the explanation afterward. And suddenly, for the first time, he wasn't sure he believed it anymore. The realization hit him hard. Every secret seemed connected. Every lie seemed connected. Every painful moment over the last year suddenly pointed toward that same period of time, that same mysterious trip, that same unexplained absence. And somewhere inside those missing hours was the truth everyone had been searching for. The problem was that nobody seemed ready to say it aloud. Not yet. Not even TAEHYUNG. But as Jimin stared into the darkness beyond the river, he had a growing feeling that once the truth finally surfaced, it wouldn't just change his relationship with Jungkook. It would change everything he thought he knew about the people closest to him. Jimin could not stop thinking about Tokyo. The moment TAEHYUNG mentioned that trip, dozens of forgotten details suddenly returned to the surface. At the time, nothing had seemed unusual. The schedules were exhausting, the days blurred together. Everyone was tired, everyone was distracted. Nobody paid attention to a few missing hours, but now those missing hours felt important, maybe even critical. Jimin stared at TAEHYUNG. What happened that night? TAEHYUNG looked conflicted, as if he was standing on the edge of a decision he had avoided for months. "I don't know everything," he said carefully, "but I know Jungkook lied." Jimin's jaw tightened. "About where he was?" "Yes, how do you know?" TAEHYUNG looked down. "Because I saw him." The answer hit harder than expected. Jimin immediately leaned forward. "You saw him where?" Another silence, another hesitation. TAEHYUNG seemed to be fighting with himself. Finally he answered, "Leaving a private meeting." Jimin frowned. "A meeting with who?" TAEHYUNG slowly shook his head. "That's the problem. I never found out." The frustration in his voice sounded genuine. "I followed him for almost 20 minutes, then I lost him." Jimin blinked. "You followed him?" TAEHYUNG gave a bitter laugh. "I know how that sounds." It sounded strange. Very strange, because TAEHYUNG was not the type of person who followed people, especially not Jungkook. Yet something about that night had bothered him enough to investigate. which meant the situation must have looked serious even then. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Jimin asked. Taehyung's expression darkened. "Because the next morning, Jungkook acted completely normal." He paused. "And because I didn't want to accuse him of something without proof." Jimin understood that reasoning. Unfortunately, it was the same reasoning that had trapped all of them for months. Everyone kept waiting for proof. Everyone kept convincing themselves they were overthinking things. Meanwhile, the truth continued growing larger in the shadows. Across town, Jungkook finally parked his car near an empty overlook outside the city. The area was quiet, isolated, exactly what he needed. He stepped outside and leaned against the hood. The cold night air helped clear his thoughts slightly, but not enough. His mind kept returning to one question. How much did Jimin know? The answer terrified him because he genuinely had no idea anymore. At first, he assumed Jimin knew nothing. Then Taehyung started acting differently. Then strange comments appeared in conversations, small reactions. Brief moments. Tiny signs that people were connecting pieces. Over time, Jungkook realized his secret might not be as hidden as he believed. The possibility haunted him. Then came tonight. Tonight changed everything. For months, he feared the truth might come out. Now he feared it might come out from someone else first. That would be worse, much worse, because if Jimin learned everything from another person, the betrayal would become impossible to explain. Jungkook looked toward the distant city lights. "I never wanted to hurt you." The words were meant for Jimin, even though he wasn't there to hear them. The painful truth was that every decision Jungkook made started with the same goal: protection. Protection for BTS, protection for the members, protection for people he cared about. Somewhere along the way, protection turned into deception. Then deception turned into secrecy. And now secrecy was turning into disaster. Back at the dorm, Suga remained awake despite the late hour. Unlike RM, he wasn't trying to solve the mystery. He was thinking about people instead, specifically Jimin. Suga knew him well enough to recognize a dangerous pattern. When Jimin was hurt, he rarely exploded immediately. Instead, he became quieter, calmer, more controlled. To outsiders, that looked healthy, mature, rational. The problem was what happened afterward. Jimin stored pain, collected it, buried it. Then one day, everything surfaced at once. Suga had seen it before, and tonight's silence worried him more than anger ever could. His phone vibrated. A message from Jimin. "Still awake?" Suga answered immediately. "Yes." Several seconds later, another message appeared. "Can we meet tomorrow morning?" Suga frowned. "Of course. What's wrong?" This time the response took longer. When it finally arrived, Suga felt his stomach drop. "I think everyone's been lying to me." He stared at the words. Not because they were dramatic, because they sounded sincere. Deeply sincere, and if Jimin truly believed that, tomorrow was going to be difficult for everyone. Meanwhile, beside the river, Taehyung continued revealing pieces of information he had kept hidden. Not everything. But more than before, after Tokyo, things changed. Jimin listened carefully. How? Jungkook became more secretive. Taehyung answered immediately. Phone calls he wouldn't explain. Meetings he wouldn't discuss. Plans he kept changing. Jimin's expression hardened. "You noticed all that?" "Of course I noticed." Taehyung looked surprised by the question. "We spent a lot of time together back then." Jimin looked away. The reminder hurt more than he expected, because it highlighted something he had been trying not to think about. While he was struggling with distance from Jungkook, Taehyung had been close enough to notice changes nobody else saw, close enough to witness secrets developing in real time, close enough to become part of the story without realizing it. Taehyung continued speaking. "At first I thought he was dealing with personal problems." "And then?" Jimin asked. "Then I found something." Jimin immediately looked up. The atmosphere shifted. "What did you find?" Taehyung hesitated again. This hesitation was different, larger, more serious. Jimin could see it immediately. Whatever came next mattered. A lot. Finally, Taehyung spoke. "A document." Jimin's heartbeat accelerated. "What kind of document?" Taehyung looked directly into his eyes. "Something I was never supposed to see." The answer created more questions than it solved. Jimin's frustration returned instantly. "Taehyung." His voice sharpened. "Stop talking around it." Taehyung nodded slowly. He seemed exhausted by secrecy too. "I found paperwork connected to a private agreement." Jimin felt a chill run through him. Taehyung swallowed hard. "I don't know exactly." The disappointment on Jimin's face appeared immediately. Taehyung raised a hand before he could respond. "But I know one thing." "What?" "It involved a condition." Jimin stared at him. "A condition?" Taehyung nodded. "And whatever that condition was." He paused. Jungkook hated it. The words hung heavily in the air because suddenly an entirely new possibility emerged. What if Jungkook wasn't hiding the truth because he wanted to? What if he was hiding it because he had to? Jimin hated the thought immediately. Not because it sounded impossible, because it sounded possible, very possible, and if that was true, the story might be far more complicated than betrayal, love, or jealousy. It might involve something much bigger. something powerful enough to control Jungkook's choices for an entire year. The realization settled heavily between them. Neither spoke for several moments. Finally, Jimin looked toward the dark water again. For the first time all night, he wasn't sure who the villain was anymore, and that uncertainty frightened him more than any secret they had uncovered so far. The possibility refused to leave Jimin's mind. What if Jungkook had been trapped? What if the lies, the distance, the secrecy, and even the confusion surrounding Taehyung were all symptoms of something larger hiding underneath? He hated the idea because it complicated everything. Anger was easier when there was a clear person to blame, but the more information appeared, the less simple the situation became. Jimin leaned back against the bench and closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered countless conversations from the past year, small moments that seemed meaningless at the time. Jungkook staring into space during meetings, Jungkook canceling plans unexpectedly, Jungkook looking exhausted even after resting. Back then, Jimin interpreted those moments as emotional distance. Now he wasn't so sure. Maybe they were signs of pressure. Maybe they were signs of fear. Maybe they were signs that Jungkook had been carrying something alone for far too long. Beside him, Taehyung remained unusually quiet. Eventually, Jimin opened his eyes again. "Tell me about the document." Taehyung immediately shook his head. "There's not much to tell." Jimin wasn't convinced. "You said it involved a condition." "That's all I know." "You read it?" "Part of it." Jimin frowned, and Taehyung hesitated before answering. There were sections blacked out. That answer surprised Jimin. "Blacked out?" Taehyung nodded, almost like a legal review copy. Jimin's confusion deepened. Nothing about this sounded normal anymore. What kind of agreement required hidden sections? Why would Jungkook be connected to something like that? More importantly, why would he keep it secret from the people closest to him? Taehyung looked toward the river. "I never told anyone because I didn't understand it." He paused. "And because I hoped it wasn't important." Jimin laughed quietly. There was no humor in it. Everyone keeps hoping things aren't important. Taehyung gave a tired smile. "Apparently we're all terrible at that." Back across the city, Jungkook sat alone on the overlook watching distant traffic move beneath him. His phone remained silent now. No messages, no calls, just emptiness. Strangely, the silence felt worse. At least messages demanded action. Silence left him alone with his thoughts. And his thoughts were becoming dangerous. The more he reflected on the past year, the more mistakes he saw. Not one mistake, hundreds. Small ones. Large ones, some intentional, some accidental, all connected. The biggest mistake wasn't the agreement, it wasn't the secrecy. It wasn't even the confession about Taehyung. The biggest mistake was believing he could carry everything alone. That belief had poisoned everything. Every time someone offered help, he declined. Every time someone noticed something was wrong, he changed the subject. Every time Jimin asked if he was okay, he lied. Not because he wanted to deceive him, because he thought he was protecting him. Jungkook laughed bitterly at the memory. Protection, that word again, it had become his excuse for everything, a justification, a shield. Yet looking back now, he couldn't ignore the obvious truth. The people he tried hardest to protect ended up hurt the most. The realization made his chest ache. He pulled out his phone and opened an old conversation. Jimin's name appeared at the top, hundreds of messages. Years of memories, shared jokes, arguments, encouragement, support. Jungkook scrolled through them slowly. Then he stopped at one message from months earlier, a simple question from Jimin. "Are you sure you're okay?" Jungkook remembered exactly where he was when he received it. He remembered staring at the screen. He remembered wanting to tell the truth. Then he remembered typing a lie instead. "Yes, I'm fine." Looking at those words now felt unbearable. Because that single lie represented everything wrong with the last year. Back at the dorm, had started making notes. Not literally, mentally. Organizing information, tracking timelines, looking for patterns. Leadership had trained him to think this way. When situations became chaotic, someone needed to step back and see the larger picture. The problem was that every new detail created more questions. Tokyo, secret meetings, hidden agreements, emotional confessions, none of it connected cleanly. Yet RM sensed a pattern forming. One detail in particular bothered him. Timing. Everything seemed to start around the same period, the distance, the secrecy, the tension. All roads led back to the same months. That couldn't be coincidence. His phone vibrated again. This time the message came from an unexpected person. "Taehyung, are you awake?" RM immediately replied, "Yes." "What's going on?" Several moments passed. Then the answer arrived. "I think tomorrow changes everything." RM stared at the message. The wording felt deliberate, not dramatic, certain, as if Taehyung already knew something important was about to happen. The feeling unsettled him, because people only speak with that kind of certainty when a truth is about to surface. Meanwhile, beside the river, the conversation between Jimin and Taehyung had reached another uncomfortable turning point. "There's one thing I don't understand," Jimin said. Taehyung looked at him. "What? Why tonight?" The question lingered between them. Out of all nights, why did Jungkook finally say it tonight? Taehyung's expression immediately darkened. He had been wondering the same thing, because it didn't make sense. Jungkook had hidden his emotions for months, maybe longer, so why choose tonight? Why suddenly confess? Why suddenly break down? Unless something forced his hand. The realization struck both of them almost simultaneously. JIMIN leaned forward. The message. Taehyung frowned. What message? Someone contacted him. JIMIN explained. I don't know who, but something happened before the confession. Taehyung's eyes widened slightly. The possibility made sense. Too much sense. If Jungkook received information that threatened his secret, it could explain everything. The timing, the panic, the emotional collapse. JIMIN immediately stood up. We need to find him. Taehyung rose as well. Right now, yes. JIMIN's voice was firm, because whatever happened tonight didn't start with that confession. His expression hardened. Something scared him. Taehyung looked uncertain. And if we're too late? JIMIN didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded quieter than before, more vulnerable. Then I think he might make a decision he'll regret. Those words lingered heavily in the cold night air, because both of them knew Jungkook. They knew how much pressure he could endure before breaking. They knew how much guilt he carried, and they both suddenly realized something terrifying. If Jungkook truly believed he was about to lose everyone, there was no way to predict what he might do next, and somewhere out there in the darkness, alone with his thoughts and his secrets, Jungkook was approaching a crossroads that could change all of their lives forever. JIMIN and Taehyung left the riverside almost immediately. Neither wanted to waste another minute. The problem was that neither knew where Jungkook had gone. His phone was still active, but every call either rang endlessly or went unanswered. That alone made JIMIN more nervous. Jungkook almost always answered eventually, even when he needed space, even when he was upset. Silence was unusual. Tonight everything felt unusual. Inside the car, Taehyung drove while JIMIN stared out the window. The city lights blurred together as they moved through the empty streets. Neither spoke much. Both were trapped inside their own thoughts. Finally, Taehyung broke the silence. What are you going to do if we find him? JIMIN didn't answer immediately, because the truth was he had no idea. Part of him wanted answers, part of him wanted explanations, part of him wanted to demand the truth about every lie, every secret, every missing piece, but another part of him was worried, deeply worried. The image of Jungkook crying earlier refused to leave his mind. Jungkook wasn't just emotional tonight. He looked cornered, like someone running out of places to hide. I don't know, JIMIN admitted. Taehyung glanced toward him briefly. That's honest. JIMIN laughed quietly. It's the only thing I have left right now. The answer made Taehyung look away, because honesty was exactly what had been missing for too long. Across the city, Jungkook remained at the overlook. The cold wind continued pushing against him, but he barely noticed anymore. His attention was fixed on something else, his phone screen, more specifically a folder he had avoided opening for months. The folder contained documents, messages, records, evidence, pieces of a story nobody else knew. His thumb hovered above the screen. One tap. That was all it would take. One tap and the truth would finally become impossible to hide. Jungkook stared at it for several seconds before lowering the phone again. He wasn't ready, or maybe he was afraid. The distinction barely mattered anymore. A memory suddenly surfaced, one he rarely allowed himself to revisit the night after Tokyo, the night everything truly changed. He remembered sitting alone in a hotel room long after everyone else had gone to sleep. The city lights glowed outside the window while a single sentence echoed inside his head. If you agree, nobody can know. At the time, those words sounded manageable, temporary, reasonable. Looking back now, they sounded like the beginning of a disaster. Because the condition wasn't difficult at first, the real problem came later. The longer the secret existed, the more people it affected. The more lies it required, the more impossible the truth became. Jungkook closed his eyes tightly. He could still remember signing his name. Still remember convincing himself it was necessary. Still remember believing he was doing the right thing. That memory haunted him because part of him still wasn't sure whether the decision itself had been wrong. Maybe the mistake wasn't agreeing. Maybe the mistake was hiding it afterward. Back at the dorm, the remaining members had finally gathered together. Nobody wanted to sleep. The uncertainty was too overwhelming. Arm sat at the table while Jin paced nearby. J-Hope leaned against the counter. Suga remained unusually quiet. The atmosphere felt tense. Eventually, Jin stopped pacing. We're missing something. Arm nodded. Definitely. Then what? Jin asked. Because none of this makes sense. Arm rubbed his forehead. I know, Suga finally spoke for the first time in several minutes. Maybe we're asking the wrong question. Everyone looked toward him. What do you mean? J-Hope asked. Suga's expression remained thoughtful. Everyone keeps asking what Jungkook is hiding. He paused. Maybe we should ask who benefits from him staying silent. The room immediately fell silent. Ram looked up slowly, because that question changed everything. If someone benefited from the secrecy, then the situation wasn't just personal anymore. It involved another party, another influence, another piece nobody had considered. The realization spread through the room like a shockwave. Meanwhile, Jimin's phone suddenly vibrated inside the car. An unknown number. Both he and TAEHYUNG noticed immediately. Jimin hesitated before answering. Hello, silence, then a voice, distorted, calm, unfamiliar. Jimin's entire body stiffened. If you're looking for JUNGKOOK, the voice said, you're already too late. Jimin's heartbeat accelerated instantly. Who is this? No answer. What are you talking about? Still silence. Then the voice spoke again. Ask him about the agreement. The call disconnected. Just like that. Gone. Jimin stared at the phone in disbelief. Beside him, TAEHYUNG looked equally shocked. What did they say? Jimin repeated the conversation. Every word, every detail. By the time he finished, TAEHYUNG's face had gone pale. Neither spoke for several moments. The implication was obvious. Someone else knew. Someone else was watching. Someone else had enough information to contact them directly. The situation had just become much more dangerous. Across the city, JUNGKOOK suddenly felt his phone vibrate. Another message, another unknown number. His stomach dropped before he even opened it. Somehow he already knew. Slowly he looked at the screen. The message contained only one sentence. They know now. JUNGKOOK's face drained of color. His worst fear had finally arrived. The secret was no longer under his control. Whatever happened next would happen with or without his permission. His hands shook as he looked toward the distant city skyline. Somewhere out there, Jimin was searching for answers. Somewhere out there, TAEHYUNG was putting pieces together. Somewhere out there, the members were trying to understand a story they only partially knew. And for the first time in an entire year, JUNGKOOK realized he had run out of time. The rules that had controlled his silence were breaking apart. The walls protecting the truth were collapsing. And the moment those walls finally fell, everyone would discover that the most painful betrayal in this story wasn't about love, jealousy, or hidden feelings at all. It was about a choice JUNGKOOK made alone, a choice that might cost him the one person he could never afford to lose. The drive through the city became more urgent after the mysterious phone call. Jimin sat forward in his seat, staring at the screen of his phone as if answers might suddenly appear. Nothing did. The unknown number could not be traced through any contact he recognized. There were no clues, no explanation, just a warning. Ask him about the agreement. The words repeated endlessly inside his head. TAEHYUNG tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He looked calmer on the surface, but Jimin could see the tension in his eyes. They were both realizing the same thing. Whatever agreement JUNGKOOK had entered into was not a private issue anymore. Someone else knew about it. Someone else cared about it. And someone else was actively pushing events forward. That changed everything. Do you think he's in danger? TAEHYUNG finally asked. Jimin answered immediately. Yes, the certainty surprised even him. But it was true. Whether the danger was physical, emotional, or something else entirely, JUNGKOOK was clearly under pressure. Nobody behaved like this without a reason. Nobody carried this much fear without a reason. TAEHYUNG nodded slowly. I think so too, silence returned. Outside, the city continued moving normally. Cars passed, traffic lights changed. People walked through brightly lit streets. None of them knew that somewhere within the city, a secret buried for over a year was beginning to explode. Meanwhile, JUNGKOOK remained standing beside his car at the overlook. The latest message had destroyed whatever hope he still had of controlling the situation. They know now, 4 simple words, 4 devastating words, because he knew exactly who they referred to. Jimin, TAEHYUNG, maybe even the members. The circle was closing. The truth was escaping. JUNGKOOK looked toward the folder on his phone again. This time he opened it. His hands trembled as documents filled the screen. Legal papers, confidential correspondence, meeting records. Every piece of evidence connected to the choice he made in Tokyo. Every piece of evidence connected to the promise he had kept ever since. For nearly a minute he simply stared at them. Then another memory surfaced. The real beginning, not Tokyo, before the agreement, before the secrecy. A single conversation that changed everything. It happened after a difficult period for BTS. Pressure was everywhere. Expectations were growing. Opportunities were appearing, so were risks. During that time, JUNGKOOK was approached privately. The proposal sounded impossible at first, then appealing, then necessary. The people making the offer knew exactly which buttons to press. They knew how much he cared about BTS. They knew how much responsibility he felt toward the members. Most importantly, they knew he would sacrifice almost anything for the group's future. That was the trap. It never felt like a trap at the time. It felt like an opportunity to help, an opportunity to protect everyone, an opportunity to carry a burden himself so nobody else had to. Looking back now, JUNGKOOK finally understood the manipulation, but understanding it a year later changed nothing. The damage was already done. Back at the dorm, RM had become increasingly uneasy. Suga's observation kept replaying inside his head. Who benefits from his silence? It was the right question. Maybe the first truly right question all night. RM stood up and walked toward the window. The city lights reflected against the glass. Leadership often required accepting uncomfortable truths. Tonight felt like one of those moments. Because if someone benefited from Jungkook's silence, then someone also benefited from his isolation. Someone benefited from the confusion between him and JIMIN. Someone benefited from the misunderstandings involving TAEHYUNG. That possibility made RM deeply uncomfortable. His phone suddenly vibrated. A new message, this time from an unfamiliar number. RM frowned immediately. Slowly, he opened it. The message contained only one line, "Stop looking into Tokyo." RM's entire body froze. For several seconds, he simply stared at the screen. Then he read it again. "Stop looking into Tokyo." No greeting, no explanation, no signature. Just a warning. The implications hit instantly. Whoever was behind this knew more than they should. Much more. Across the city, Jin received a message. Then J-Hope received one, even Suga. Different wording, same purpose, stop asking questions. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Someone was watching all of them. Someone was nervous. Someone wanted the truth buried. And that realization frightened the members far more than the messages themselves. Inside the car, Jimin's phone rang again. Unknown number. His pulse immediately accelerated. He answered without hesitation. "Who are you?" This time the voice sounded different, not distorted, not disguised, familiar, painfully familiar. Jimin's eyes widened. "Jungkook?" Silence lingered briefly. Then Jungkook finally spoke. "Don't tell the others yet." Jimin immediately sat up straighter. "Where are you, please?" Jungkook's voice sounded exhausted. "Just listen." Jimin's emotions exploded all at once. Relief, anger, worry, confusion. "Do you have any idea what's happening right now?" he demanded. "Yes," Jungkook answered quietly. "More than you realize." Taehyung glanced toward him but remained silent. He could hear enough to know the conversation was serious. Jimin took a deep breath. "Then tell me the truth." Silence followed. Long silence. Finally, Jungkook laughed bitterly. Not because anything was funny. Because he sounded defeated, completely defeated. That's the problem. Jimin's stomach tightened. What problem? Jungkook closed his eyes. Standing alone beneath the night sky, he finally said the words he had feared for over a year. "The truth isn't only mine to tell." Jimin felt a chill run through him immediately, because that sentence changed everything. Up until now, everyone assumed Jungkook was protecting himself, protecting his reputation, protecting his secrets. But if the truth belonged to other people too, then the situation was far larger than anyone imagined. Jimin gripped the phone tighter. "What does that mean?" Another pause. Then Jungkook answered, "It means if I talk, other people get hurt." The words sounded sincere, deeply sincere, not manipulative, not defensive, just honest. And somehow that honesty made the situation even more terrifying, because for the first time all night, Jimin believed that Jungkook's silence might not have been selfish at all. It might have been a sacrifice, a terrible, painful, destructive sacrifice. The problem was that sacrifices have consequences, and after a year of secrets, lies, misunderstandings, and heartbreak, those consequences were finally arriving. Neither of them realized it yet, but somewhere else in the city, another person was already making a move. A move that would force the truth into the open whether Jungkook was ready or not. And once that happened, every relationship inside BTS would be tested in ways none of them saw coming. Jimin held the phone tightly against his ear while the city lights rushed past outside the car window. For a moment, neither he nor Jungkook spoke. The silence between them felt different from before. Not empty, heavy. As if both of them were standing on opposite sides of a door that was finally beginning to open. "Where are you?" Jimin asked again. This time his voice was calmer. Jungkook hesitated. "Does it matter?" The answer immediately frustrated Jimin. "Of course it matters." "Why?" Jungkook asked quietly. "Because if you find me, then this becomes real." Jimin closed his eyes. That sentence hurt more than it should have, because it sounded like someone trying to delay the inevitable. Someone trying to buy a little more time before everything collapsed. "It's already real," Jimin replied. "You told me you still loved Taehyung." The words hung in the air. Taehyung heard them too. His grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. On the other end of the call, Jungkook laughed bitterly. "That's what everyone is focused on." Jimin frowned immediately. "What does that mean?" Another silence followed. Jungkook answered. That confession wasn't the truth. Jimin felt his heartbeat stop. Even Taehyung turned sharply toward him. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Jimin found his voice. "What?" Jungkook exhaled slowly. "Or at least not the whole truth." Jimin's chest tightened, because suddenly the foundation of everything they had been discussing started shifting beneath their feet. If Jungkook's confession wasn't the whole truth, then what exactly had happened tonight? Why say it at all? Why break down? Why create this disaster? The answer came before Jimin could ask. "I panicked," Jungkook admitted. The honesty shocked him. "When I got that message, I panicked." Jimin immediately remembered the mysterious warning, the message that seemed to trigger everything. What did it say? He asked. Jungkook remained silent. Jungkook, it said they were going to expose everything. Jimin looked toward Taehyung. Their expressions mirrored each other. Everything? Jimin repeated. The agreement, the meetings, the promises, all of it. Jungkook's voice sounded exhausted. I thought if the truth was coming out anyway, maybe I could control part of it. The realization struck Jimin instantly. The confession, the tears, the emotional collapse, they weren't planned, they were damage control. A desperate attempt to reveal one painful truth before a larger truth surfaced. That understanding changed everything, because suddenly Jungkook's behavior made sense, terrible sense. Back at the dorm, RM's concern continued growing. The strange warning message refused to leave his mind. Stop looking into Tokyo. It wasn't just the content that bothered him, it was the confidence. Whoever sent it clearly believed they had influence, access, information, more information than they should possess. RM looked around the room at the other members. Jin seemed unsettled, J-Hope looked worried, even Suga appeared more serious than usual. Something bigger was happening. Everyone could feel it. The problem was that none of them knew where the center of the storm actually was. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, a figure sat alone inside a parked vehicle watching a laptop screen. Multiple files were open, names, dates, records, messages, information collected over months, maybe longer. The person's face remained hidden in darkness. Their attention never left the screen. One file in particular stayed open longer than the others. The file contained Jungkook's name. Beside it were dozens of documents connected to the agreement. Slowly, the figure closed the laptop. The decision had already been made. The truth was going public soon, very soon. Back inside the moving car, Jimin struggled to process everything he was hearing. Why didn't you tell me? The question escaped before he could stop it. Silence answered him initially. Then Jungkook spoke. Because I knew you'd try to help. Jimin blinked. What? You always do. Jungkook laughed quietly. The sound carried no happiness. You would have tried to fix it. Jimin felt something twist inside his chest, and that's a bad thing? Sometimes. Jungkook answered immediately. Because sometimes fixing something means getting hurt. Jimin didn't know how to respond. The logic sounded frustrating, infuriating even. Yet part of him understood exactly what Jungkook meant. Both of them had a habit of carrying burdens alone. Both believed they could protect others through sacrifice. The difference was that Jungkook had taken that belief much further, much too far. Taehyung finally spoke for the first time. Jungkook. His voice cut through the conversation. A long silence followed on the other end. Then Jungkook answered softly. Hey, the simple exchange carried months of unresolved tension. Neither acknowledged it directly. Neither needed to. Tell him the truth. Taehyung's voice remained calm. Jungkook laughed again. Which truth? That question immediately chilled both of them. Because it implied multiple truths, multiple layers, multiple secrets, more than anyone realized. Jimin closed his eyes briefly. How many things are we still missing? Another pause. Then Jungkook gave an answer neither expected. Too many. The honesty made everything worse. Because for the first time, Jimin realized they weren't close to the end of this story. They were barely reaching the middle. Suddenly, another call appeared on Jimin's screen. Unknown number again. His stomach dropped instantly. Jungkook, I see it, Jungkook replied. Don't answer. The urgency in his voice shocked both Jimin and Taehyung. Why? Jimin asked. Jungkook didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded darker than before, more afraid. Because if it's who I think it is, he stopped. Then we're out of time. The call continued ringing. Jimin stared at the screen. Every instinct told him not to answer, yet curiosity fought against caution. Finally, the ringing stopped. Several seconds later, a message arrived instead. Jimin opened it. The moment he read the contents, all color disappeared from his face. Taehyung noticed immediately. What happened? Jimin couldn't answer. Not right away. He simply handed over the phone. Taehyung looked down at the message. His expression changed instantly. Shock, then disbelief. Then something much worse. Fear. The message contained an attachment. A photograph taken in Tokyo over a year ago. In the image, Jungkook was sitting across from 3 unidentified people in a private conference room. Papers covered the table. Documents. Contracts. Agreements. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the timestamp, because the photograph proved something undeniable. On the night Jungkook claimed he was somewhere else, he had lied, completely lied, and for the first time Jimin possessed proof, real proof. Not suspicions, not theories, evidence. The walls around the secret were finally cracking. And the person sending these messages clearly intended to destroy them completely. The photograph changed everything. For months there had only been questions, suspicions, half-truths, and uncomfortable feelings nobody could fully explain. Now there was evidence, real evidence. Jimin stared at the image again while Taehyung drove in silence. The timestamp was impossible to ignore. The location was impossible to ignore. Most importantly, the lie was possible to ignore. Jungkook had not been where he claimed to be that night. He had been somewhere else entirely. Meeting people nobody recognized, signing something nobody understood. The discovery should have made Jimin angry. Instead, it made him uneasy, because the expression on Jungkook's face in the photograph did not look confident. It did not look ambitious. It did not even look happy. He looked trapped. The observation stayed with Jimin immediately. Beside him, Taehyung had noticed the same thing. Look at him. Jimin nodded slowly. I know. Neither needed to explain further. The tension in Jungkook's posture was obvious. His shoulders looked rigid. His expression looked exhausted. His eyes lacked the confidence people usually carried into important business meetings. Whatever was happening in that room, Jungkook did not appear comfortable with it. Back at the overlook, Jungkook's phone remained pressed against his ear. He could tell from the silence that Jimin had seen something significant. The timing was too perfect, too dangerous. You got a picture, didn't you? Jungkook asked quietly. Jimin immediately looked up. How do you know? Jungkook laughed without humor, because there aren't many cards left for them to play. The statement made Taehyung's stomach tighten. Them. Jungkook kept saying them. Not him, not her, them, a group, multiple people. The detail felt important. Very important. Who are they? Jimin asked. This time his voice carried genuine urgency. Jungkook remained silent for several moments. When he finally answered, his words shocked both of them. That's the one question I can't answer. Jimin felt frustration rising immediately. Can't or won't? Another pause, then Jungkook replied, both. The answer made everything worse, because now it sounded less like secrecy and more like fear. Real fear, the kind that changes people's behavior. The kind that keeps people awake at night. The kind that forces impossible choices. Across the city, RM's phone rang unexpectedly. The unfamiliar number immediately caught his attention. After a brief hesitation, he answered, hello, no response, just silence. Then a distorted voice finally spoke, asked Jungkook why he signed it. RM's entire body froze. Who is this? The caller ignored the question. Ask him what he traded. The line disconnected instantly. RM stared at the phone. His pulse had accelerated dramatically. Ask Jungkook why he signed it. Ask him what he traded. The wording bothered him deeply because agreements usually involved exchanges, benefits, conditions, sacrifices. The idea that Jungkook might have traded something suddenly seemed very real, too real. Meanwhile, Jimin and Taehyung were experiencing the same realization. What did they want from you? Jimin asked quietly. For the first time during the conversation, Jungkook sounded genuinely tired, not emotionally tired, completely exhausted. The exhaustion of someone carrying a burden for far too long. Everything starts with that question? Jimin waited. So did Taehyung. Finally, Jungkook continued. The problem is that the answer changes how you'll see me. Jimin's chest tightened. Try me. Another silence followed. Then Jungkook said something unexpected. Do you remember what BTS was going through back then? Jimin immediately did. Everyone did. It had been one of the most stressful periods of their careers. Endless schedules, endless expectations, endless pressure. Mistakes carried consequences. Decisions carried consequences. Every step felt important. Of course I remember. Jungkook inhaled deeply. Then you remember how worried everyone was. Jimin nodded even though Jungkook couldn't see him. Especially you. The comment surprised him. Me? You were carrying everyone. Jungkook's voice softened slightly. You always do. Jimin didn't know what to say, because part of him knew it was true. During difficult periods, he often absorbed stress from everyone around him. It was both a strength and a weakness, Jungkook continued. I hated watching it, Jimin frowned. Watching what? Watching everyone struggle. His voice lowered. Watching you struggle. For a moment, nobody spoke. The words felt too personal, too honest. Then Jungkook said something that made both Jimin and Taehyung go completely silent. The agreement wasn't about me. Jimin's heartbeat accelerated. What? It never was. Jungkook answered immediately. That's what nobody understands. The implications hit instantly. If the agreement wasn't about Jungkook, then who was it about? BTS, the members? Someone specific? The possibilities exploded in every direction. Then what was it about? Jimin demanded. This time Jungkook answered faster than expected, almost as if he was tired of hiding this particular piece. It was supposed to protect the group. The words settled heavily inside the car. Jimin looked toward Taehyung. Taehyung looked back. Neither knew what to say. Because that answer changed the entire story. Suddenly, Tokyo wasn't about personal ambition. It wasn't about secret opportunities. It wasn't even about hidden relationships. It was about BTS, at least according to Jungkook. The question was whether they believed him. Before either could respond, Jungkook spoke again. His voice sounded distant now, almost defeated. Protecting something and saving something aren't always the same thing. Jimin felt a chill run through him. Because that sentence sounded like regret, deep regret. The kind people carry for years, the kind that never fully disappears. Suddenly, another notification appeared on Jimin's phone, then another, then another. Messages, emails, attachments, dozens arriving at once. His eyes widened immediately. Taehyung noticed. "What is it?" Jimin opened the first file, then the second, then the third. His face lost all color. The documents contained more photographs, more records, more evidence. Entire sections of information connected to the Tokyo meeting. Information someone was releasing piece by piece, deliberately, methodically, as if preparing for something larger, much larger. Jungkook heard the silence through the phone and instantly understood what was happening. His worst fear was becoming reality. The leak had started. Not tomorrow, not next week, right now, tonight, and once it started, there was no way to stop it. Because whoever had been hiding in the shadows for over a year had finally decided it was time for everyone to see the truth, or at least the version of the truth they wanted the world to believe. The flood of files continued arriving, one after messages, documents, photographs, screenshots, records from meetings nobody should have known about. Jimin stared at the screen in disbelief while Taehyung pulled the car to the side of the road. Neither could focus on driving anymore. The situation was moving too fast. Every few seconds, another notification appeared. Every few seconds, another piece of the puzzle landed in front of them. But instead of creating clarity, the information created chaos. Because the more evidence they received, the more confusing the story became. Some files seemed to support Jungkook's explanation. Others made him look guilty. Some suggested sacrifice. Others suggested betrayal. It was impossible to know which version was real. On the other end of the phone, Jungkook remained silent. He already knew what those files contained. Not every detail, but enough. Enough to understand the strategy. Whoever was leaking the information wasn't releasing everything at once. They were controlling the narrative. Revealing pieces, guiding conclusions, manipulating perception. It was a tactic designed to create panic, and it was working. "Don't trust all of it," Jungkook finally said. Jimin immediately looked up. "What, the documents?" Jungkook's voice sounded firm for the first time all night. "Some of them are real," he paused. "Some aren't." The statement instantly complicated everything. Taehyung frowned. "You're saying the evidence is fake?" "I'm saying parts of it are." Jungkook answered carefully. "That's why this is dangerous." Jimin's frustration exploded. "Then tell us what's real." Silence answered him, a painful silence, because the truth was obvious. Jungkook still wasn't ready, or maybe he still couldn't. Either way, they remained trapped in uncertainty. Across the city, RM's phone vibrated again, then again, then again. Soon every member's device was receiving the same files, the same photographs, the same records. Jin looked down at his screen in shock. Jahope sat frozen. Suga remained silent, studying each detail carefully. Nobody spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, RM broke the silence. "Someone wants us to see this." The statement sounded obvious, yet it carried enormous weight. Because people only release information like this when they have a goal. The question was simple. What goal? Meanwhile, inside a dark office several kilometers away, the mysterious figure responsible for the leak watched everything unfold in real time. Screens displayed message deliveries, file transfers, open rates, reactions. Every step had been planned carefully, every release timed perfectly. The person leaned back in their chair and smiled faintly. The first phase was complete. Now came the important part, because the goal was never simply exposing the agreement. The goal was forcing Jungkook to make a choice he had avoided for over a year. Back inside the parked car, Jimin opened another file. This one immediately caught his attention. Unlike the others, it appeared to be part of a transcript, a conversation. Incomplete, redacted in places, yet one sentence remained fully visible. If the members discover this, the agreement becomes worthless. Jimin's heart sank. Taehyung read the line over his shoulder. Neither spoke, because that sentence revealed something terrifying. The agreement had never just required secrecy. Its value depended on secrecy, which meant exposure could trigger consequences, real consequences. Suddenly, Jimin understood why Jungkook seemed so afraid, why he carried the burden alone, why he panicked tonight. If revealing the truth created damage, then every decision became impossible. Tell the truth and risk consequences. Stay silent and lose trust. It was a trap with no good outcome. "Jungkook," Jimin's voice softened slightly. "What happens if this gets exposed?" For the first time, Jungkook answered immediately. "I don't know anymore." The honesty stunned him. "What do you mean?" "I knew before," Jungkook admitted quietly. "At least I thought I did." He looked toward the distant city lights. "But whoever is behind this changed the rules." The phrase immediately caught Jimin's attention. "Changed the rules," it sounded important. Very important. "Explain." Jungkook laughed weakly. "The agreement was based on conditions." He paused. "Specific conditions and?" Jimin asked. "And someone violated them." The statement hung heavily in the air because suddenly a new possibility emerged. What if the crisis wasn't caused by Jungkook? What if someone else broke the agreement first? What if the leak itself represented a betrayal? Taehyung immediately noticed the same implication. "You think someone turned on you?" Jungkook didn't answer directly. He didn't need to. The silence said enough. Minutes passed. Nobody knew what to say anymore. The situation had become too large, too complicated. Every answer generated 3 new questions. Every revelation exposed another layer underneath. Then something unexpected happened. Jungkook's voice changed, not dramatically, subtly. Yet both Jimin and Taehyung noticed immediately he sounded calmer, resolved, as if he had finally reached a decision. "Jimin, yeah?" A long pause followed. Then Jungkook spoke the words he had been avoiding for over a year. "I'm done running." Jimin's heartbeat accelerated. "What does that mean?" Jungkook exhaled slowly. "It means I'm going to tell you everything." The atmosphere inside the car changed instantly. Even Taehyung straightened. For the first time all night, it felt like they were approaching the center of the mystery, the real truth, the whole truth. But before Jimin could respond, another notification appeared on his phone, then another, then dozens more. The leak had entered a new phase. This time the files weren't private, they were public, social platforms, news sites, forums, discussions. The information was spreading everywhere, faster than anyone could stop it, faster than anyone could contain it. Jungkook saw the notifications arriving and immediately understood what had happened. The secret was no longer confined to the members, no longer confined to private conversations. The entire world was starting to see it. The timing couldn't have been worse, because now he had only 2 choices left: reveal the truth himself or watch someone else define it for him. And as the city around them continued glowing beneath the night sky, Jungkook realized the moment he had feared for over a year had finally arrived. The truth was coming, not in pieces, not in fragments, all at once. And when Jimin finally learned what Jungkook sacrificed, why he sacrificed it, and who had manipulated the entire situation from the beginning, their relationship would either survive the revelation or break in a way neither of them could ever repair. The world seemed to move faster after the leak became public. Notification exploded across every platform. Discussions multiplied by the minute. Screenshots spread. Theories spread even faster. Some people claimed Jungkook had betrayed BTS. Others insisted he had secretly protected them. Nobody knew the full story, yet everyone already had an opinion. That was the most dangerous part. Information moved faster than truth. Inside the parked car, Jimin watched the chaos unfold in real time. His phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Messages from friends, industry contacts, staff members, reporters, even people he hadn't spoken to in months were suddenly asking questions. The situation was spiraling beyond anyone's control. Across from him, Taehyung looked equally concerned. Neither cared about public opinion right now. Their focus remained on one thing: Jungkook. Because somewhere in the middle of all this chaos was a person who had clearly been carrying something alone for far too long. "Where are you?" Jimin asked again. This time his voice carried less anger and more urgency. Jungkook remained silent briefly, then he finally answered. "The overlook near the North Highway." Jimin immediately looked at Taehyung. Neither needed to discuss it. They already knew where they were going. Taehyung started the car again. "Stay there." Jungkook laughed quietly. "I think I've been staying in one place too long already." The answer made Jimin's chest tighten, because it sounded like regret, deep regret, the kind that changed people. The drive began immediately. Meanwhile, back at the dorm, Arm had reached the same conclusion. They could not solve this through messages or leaked documents. They needed the truth directly from Jungkook. No filters, no manipulation, no anonymous sources, just the truth. "We're going," announced. Jin nodded immediately. J-Hope stood up. Suga grabbed his jacket without a word. Whatever happened tonight, it was no longer something they could watch from a distance. Meanwhile, at the overlook, Jungkook sat on the hood of his car, staring at the city below. The wind felt colder now, or maybe he was finally noticing it. His phone rested beside him. The folder containing every secret remained open. For months he avoided looking at it. Tonight he couldn't stop. One file in particular caught his attention. The original agreement, the document that started everything. Slowly he opened it. His eyes moved across the familiar pages: legal language, conditions, obligations, consequences. The words felt different now than they had a year ago. Back then they looked like an opportunity. Tonight they looked like chains. Jungkook closed the file and laughed bitterly. What a mess! The statement disappeared into the darkness around him. A year ago he believed he was making the strongest decision of his life. Tonight he felt like he was looking at the biggest mistake he had ever made. Yet even now, part of him wasn't sure he would choose differently. That was the cruelest part. Because despite everything that happened, despite all the pain, despite the lies and misunderstandings, his original reason still mattered. His original reason still felt worth protecting. The problem was that protecting something and destroying yourself in the process were not the same thing. He understood that now, much too late. 20 minutes later, headlights appeared in the distance. Jungkook immediately recognized the vehicle: Jimin and Taehyung. The moment had arrived. No more delays, no more excuses, no more hiding. He stood slowly as the car approached. His heartbeat accelerated with every passing second. Not because he feared the truth itself, because he feared Jimin's reaction to it. The vehicle stopped. The engine went silent. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Jimin stepped out first. Their eyes met immediately. The emotions inside that single look were impossible to describe: hurt, relief, frustration, concern, anger, loyalty. Months of complicated feelings collided at once. Neither looked away. Finally, Jimin spoke. "Look terrible," JUNGKOOK laughed quietly. "I feel worse." Surprisingly, that answer almost made Jimin smile. TAEHYUNG stepped out next but remained silent. This conversation clearly belonged to them first. The cold wind moved through the overlook while nobody spoke. Finally, Jimin took a few steps closer. "No more half-truths," JUNGKOOK nodded. "No more half-truths, no more protecting me from information. Okay. No more deciding what I deserve to know." JUNGKOOK swallowed hard. "Okay." Jimin stared at him carefully. "Then tell me." The words landed heavily. JUNGKOOK knew exactly what he was asking, not just for facts, for honesty. Complete honesty. The kind neither of them had experienced in a long time. JUNGKOOK looked down briefly before lifting his head again. "The agreement happened because of a crisis." Jimin listened carefully. "So did TAEHYUNG." "What crisis?" JUNGKOOK hesitated. The memory clearly remained painful. A problem nobody outside a small circle ever discovered. Jimin's expression hardened. "What kind of problem?" JUNGKOOK looked toward the city lights. Then he finally answered, "The kind that could have damaged BTS permanently." The words immediately changed the atmosphere, because suddenly the story became larger than personal emotions, larger than relationships, larger than misunderstandings. BTS itself had entered the center of the conversation. JUNGKOOK continued before anyone could interrupt. People were making plans. His voice remained steady. Decisions, negotiations, contingencies. Jimin frowned. "What are you talking about?" JUNGKOOK laughed without humor. "Exactly what I couldn't tell anyone." He paused. "Including you." The tension increased instantly. Every answer seemed to reveal a larger mystery underneath. TAEHYUNG folded his arms. "Who approached you?" JUNGKOOK looked at him. For a moment he considered refusing. Then he remembered his promise: no more half-truths. Executives. Both Jimin and TAEHYUNG immediately froze. Not because the answer was impossible, because it was plausible, very plausible. Suddenly Tokyo made more sense. The private meetings, the secrecy, the legal documents, the pressure, everything fit. But it also created a terrifying new question. What kind of agreement would require a BTS member to hide it from everyone else for over a year? JUNGKOOK saw the question forming in their minds. He took a deep breath. Then he said the sentence that would change everything. "They wanted something from me." Jimin remained completely focused. "What?" JUNGKOOK closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, his voice sounded quieter than before, more vulnerable. "They wanted leverage." Silence consumed the overlook. Neither Jimin nor TAEHYUNG spoke. Neither even moved. Because suddenly the story they thought they understood was becoming something entirely different. And judging by the look in JUNGKOOK's eyes, the worst part of the truth had not even arrived yet. The word lingered in the cold night air long after JUNGKOOK said it. "Leverage." Jimin repeated it silently inside his head. The more he thought about it, the less he liked it, because leverage implied power. Influence, control. It implied that someone wanted a way to shape outcomes, a way to guarantee cooperation, a way to protect their own interests. None of those possibilities sounded good. JUNGKOOK stood with his hands in his pockets, avoiding eye contact for a moment. The city lights behind him made his expression difficult to read, but Jimin could still see the exhaustion written across his face. This wasn't the exhaustion of a bad day. This was the exhaustion of carrying something for years. "Leverage for what?" Jimin finally asked. JUNGKOOK exhaled slowly. "For the future." The answer immediately frustrated him. "That's not an explanation." JUNGKOOK nodded. "I know." For several seconds he searched for the right words. Then he finally continued. "There were concerns." Jimin folded his arms. "Concerns about what?" JUNGKOOK laughed bitterly. "About everything." He looked toward the distant skyline, the future of BTS, contracts, business decisions, timing. His voice lowered. "Control." That last word landed heavily, because everyone in the industry understood the significance of control. Decisions made behind closed doors could affect careers, projects, and entire futures. Jimin felt a growing sense of unease. Not because the explanation sounded impossible, because it sounded believable. Too believable. TAEHYUNG spoke next. "And where do you fit into that?" JUNGKOOK's expression immediately darkened. "I was useful." The answer came quickly, too quickly, as if he had repeated it to himself countless times before. "Useful how?" TAEHYUNG asked. JUNGKOOK looked away again. The hesitation returned. Jimin immediately noticed this part mattered a lot. Finally, JUNGKOOK answered, "Because they knew I'd do anything for the group." The words hit harder than expected, not because they were dramatic, because they were true. Everyone standing there knew they were true. JUNGKOOK had always been willing to sacrifice for the people he cared about, sometimes more than he should, sometimes far more. Jimin felt something uncomfortable settle in his chest because suddenly he could see how someone might exploit that. How someone might take a strength and turn it into a weakness, Jungkook continued. The proposal sounded simple. He laughed quietly. That's how these things always start. Nobody interrupted. I was told that if certain conditions were met, certain risks would disappear. Jimin frowned. What risks? Jungkook's eyes met his directly. Risks involving the members. The answer changed everything again. Because now the agreement wasn't just connected to BTS in general, it was connected to specific people, specific consequences, specific fears. Jimin's heartbeat accelerated. Which members? For the first time all night, Jungkook didn't answer immediately. His silence stretched longer than before, longer than comfortable. Then he finally spoke. You. The word hit Jimin like a physical impact. He stared at Jungkook, unable to respond. Even Taehyung looked shocked. Me? Jungkook nodded slowly. You were part of it. Jimin's mind raced instantly. Nothing about this made sense. He had never signed anything, never attended secret meetings, never agreed to hidden conditions. Explain. Jungkook swallowed hard. There were concerns about how much pressure you were carrying. Jimin blinked. What? Not just you. Jungkook corrected himself. Everyone, but mostly you. His voice softened slightly. I noticed it before anyone else admitted it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Memories surfaced inside Jimin's mind. Long schedules, exhaustion, periods where he struggled silently. Moments he thought nobody noticed. Suddenly he wasn't so sure. Jungkook continued. You kept pretending you were fine. Jimin almost laughed. And you didn't? That earned the first genuine smile of the night from Jungkook. Small, brief, painful, fair point. The smile disappeared almost immediately. The difference is that people were watching. Jimin frowned. Watching who? All of us, Jungkook answered, analyzing everything. The explanation remained frustratingly incomplete, but the emotional truth behind it felt real, too real. Across the city, RM and the other members were still heading toward the overlook. The drive felt endless. Nobody spoke much. Each person remained trapped inside their own thoughts. Eventually, Jin looked at RM. Do you believe him? RM understood the question immediately. About what? Protecting us. RM stared out the window. The answer wasn't simple. Yet something about the pieces they had uncovered kept pointing in the same direction. I believe he believes it. Jin frowned. That's different. Rum nodded. Very different. Because intentions and outcomes were not the same thing. Someone could make a terrible decision for good reasons. Someone could create enormous damage while trying to prevent it. Human beings did it all the time. Back at the overlook, Jimin remained focused on Jungkook. So what exactly did you agree to? The question finally arrived. The question at the center of everything. Jungkook's shoulders visibly tensed. The reaction alone confirmed its importance. I agreed to stay silent. Jimin frowned. About what? About certain plans. Jungkook answered. Certain discussions. His voice lowered further. Certain possibilities. Jimin's patience was beginning to disappear again. You're still doing it. Jungkook blinked. Doing what? Hiding behind vague answers. The accusation landed hard because it was true. Jungkook knew it too. He closed his eyes briefly, then nodded. You're right. Several seconds passed. When he spoke again, his voice sounded different, more direct, more honest, more dangerous. There were people discussing futures where BTS didn't stay together. Silence instantly consumed the overlook. Jimin froze. Taehyung froze. Even the wind suddenly seemed quieter, because no matter how hypothetical those discussions might have been, hearing the words aloud felt shocking, deeply shocking. Jungkook looked away toward the city again. Most of it never happened. He paused, but at the time nobody knew that. His voice carried old fear, real fear, and I was terrified. Jimin felt his stomach tighten, because for the first time he could see the younger version of Jungkook standing inside that Tokyo meeting, surrounded by executives, surrounded by pressure, surrounded by uncertainty, believing he was protecting the people he loved, believing he was carrying a burden for everyone. The realization hurt more than anger ever could. But before Jimin could respond, headlights appeared in the distance. Another vehicle approaching the overlook, then another, then another. Jungkook immediately recognized them. The members had arrived. The conversations was about to become much bigger, much messier, and judging by the expression on Jungkook's face, there was still one truth he hadn't revealed. One truth so important that even after everything they had discussed tonight, he remained afraid to say it aloud. The headlights grew brighter as the vehicles approached the overlook. Within moments, RM, Jin, Suga, and J-Hope stepped out into the cold night air. None of them looked angry. That surprised Jungkook more than anything. He had prepared himself for anger, for disappointment, for accusations. Instead, what he saw on their faces was concern, genuine concern. Somehow that felt harder to face because concern meant they still cared. And caring made the truth more painful. RM was the first to walk forward. His eyes moved from Jimin to Taehyung and finally settled on Jungkook. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then RM asked the simplest question possible. Are you okay? Jungkook almost laughed. Not because the question was funny, because after everything that had happened, after a year of secrets and one night of chaos, that was still the first thing Rem wanted to know. The answer came automatically. No. Nobody seemed surprised. Rem nodded slowly. Good. Jungkook blinked. Good? Arm folded his arms, because if you told me you were okay right now, I'd know you were lying again. For the first time all night, a few people almost smiled. Almost. The tension remained too heavy for real laughter, yet the moment mattered. It reminded everyone that despite the secrets, despite the confusion, they were still BTS. They were still people who knew each other better than almost anyone else. J-Hope stepped closer. We've seen the files. Jungkook nodded. I figured. Jin looked directly at him. Are they real? The question landed heavily, because now they were talking about evidence, facts, things that could no longer be dismissed as rumors. Jungkook took a deep breath. Some of them and the rest? Suga asked quietly. Manipulated. The answer immediately drew everyone's attention. Suga's eyes narrowed slightly. Manipulated how? Jungkook looked toward the city lights. Mixed with real information. He paused. Just enough truth to make the lies believable. Nobody interrupted. The explanation made sense. Too much sense. It was exactly how people shape narratives, exactly how they controlled perception. RM looked thoughtful. Then somebody wants a specific outcome, Jungkook nodded immediately. Yes, what outcome? RM asked. This time, Jungkook didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at each member individually, JIMIN, TAEHYUNG, Jin, J-Hope, Suga, RM. The people he had spent years protecting. The people he had spent a year lying to. The contradiction hurt. They want someone to take the blame. Silence followed. Everyone understood the significance immediately. Because blame simplified stories. Blame gave people villains. Blame made complicated situations easier to understand. The question was obvious, Jin asked. Jungkook hesitated. Maybe. Noticed the hesitation instantly. Maybe? Jungkook lowered his gaze. Or someone else. The answer immediately unsettled everyone. Because suddenly the situation wasn't just about Jungkook's reputation anymore. It involved everyone. Anyone could become a target. Anyone could become part of the narrative. The realization spread through the group like a cold wind. Meanwhile, Jimin remained focused on something else, a detail that continued bothering him. There's still something you're not saying. Jungkook immediately looked up. Their eyes met. The atmosphere changed again. Everyone noticed. Jimin took a step forward. You keep talking about protecting us. His voice remained calm. You keep talking about sacrifices. Another step. You keep talking about what happened in Tokyo. Another step. But none of that explains why you broke down tonight. The question landed perfectly, because it reached the heart of the mystery. Not the agreement, not the leak, not the executives. Tonight, the confession, the tears, the panic. Jungkook's face immediately changed. The reaction alone answered part of the question. Whatever happened tonight remained deeply personal, more personal than everything else. Taehyung noticed it too. So did RM, so did everyone. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Then Jungkook finally looked at Jimin, really looked at him. The way someone looks at a person they've wanted to tell the truth for a very long time. Because I thought I lost you. The words hit harder than anyone expected. Jimin froze, so did everyone else. Jungkook laughed weakly. That's the part nobody understands. His voice shook slightly. The agreement wasn't what broke me tonight. Jimin's heartbeat accelerated. Then what did? Jungkook swallowed hard. The message. What message? Jimin asked. Jungkook looked away briefly before answering. The first one. Everyone waited. The one that said the truth was coming out. His voice lowered. The one that said you'd find out everything. Jimin frowned. And? Jungkook's eyes met his again. There was no hiding in them anymore. No walls, no defenses, just exhaustion and honesty. And I realized the first thing you'd see was a year of lies. Silence consumed the overlook. Because suddenly everyone understood. Not completely. But enough. Jungkook wasn't terrified of the agreement itself. He wasn't terrified of exposure. He was terrified of Jimin seeing him differently. Terrified of losing trust. Terrified of becoming someone unrecognizable in the eyes of the person who mattered most. The realization changed the emotional center of the entire story. Jimin felt it immediately. The anger he had carried for hours less suddenly felt less certain, less solid, more complicated, because now he could see the fear underneath everything. The fear that drove every terrible decision, every secret, every sacrifice, every lie. Jungkook looked down. I kept telling myself I'd explain eventually. His voice sounded distant. Tomorrow, next week, after the next project, after the next problem. He laughed bitterly. Eventually never came. Nobody spoke, because everyone understood that kind of mistake. Waiting for the perfect moment. Watching it disappear, then waiting again. Eventually the truth became too large to reveal comfortably. Suddenly Jimin took another step forward. The distance between them grew smaller. Jungkook immediately tensed, not out of fear, out of uncertainty. He had no idea what was coming next. None of them did. Then Jimin asked a question nobody expected. Did you ever trust me? The words hit Jungkook harder than any accusation could have. His expression immediately crumbled, because that question cut deeper than everything else. Not because the answer was difficult, because it was obvious, painfully obvious. And yet somehow, after a year of secrecy, obvious answers were no longer enough. The cold wind moved across the overlook as everyone waited. Jungkook slowly lifted his head. His eyes looked brighter than before, more emotional, more vulnerable. And the answer he was about to give would change everything between him and JIMIN. The question hung in the air longer than anyone expected. "Did you ever trust me?" JIMIN's voice had not been angry when he asked it. That was what made it hurt so much more. Anger could be defended against. Anger could be argued with, but disappointment was different. Disappointment forced people to face themselves. Jungkook stood frozen beneath the cold night sky, staring at JIMIN as if the answer should have been obvious. In his mind it was obvious, painfully obvious. Yet looking around at everything that had happened, the leaks, the lies, the secrets, the distance, he suddenly understood why JIMIN was asking. Because trust was not measured by feelings. Trust was measured by actions, and his actions over the past year told a terrible story. A story he never intended to write. Jungkook swallowed hard, more than anyone. His voice came out quieter than expected. JIMIN didn't look convinced, not because he thought Jungkook was lying, because the answer created another problem. If Jungkook trusted him more than anyone, then why keep such a massive secret from him? Jungkook saw the question forming immediately. JIMIN folded his arms. "Then answer it." Jungkook looked away briefly before speaking again. "Trust wasn't the reason I stayed silent." "Then what was?" JIMIN asked. The answer came instantly: fear. Nobody moved, nobody interrupted. Because that single word carried more honesty than anything Jungkook had said all night. Fear, not strategy, not manipulation, not selfishness. Fear. Jungkook laughed bitterly. "I was terrified." His eyes moved across the group. "Terrified that if I told the truth, people would get hurt." He paused. "Terrified that if I stayed silent, people would get hurt." Terrified because every choice felt wrong. The confession landed heavily. RM lowered his gaze slightly. Jin remained silent. J-Hope looked troubled. Suga watched carefully. TAEHYUNG looked exhausted, and JIMIN simply listened. Jungkook continued. At first, the agreement felt temporary. His voice sounded distant now, almost lost inside old memories. Then weeks passed. He shook his head. Then months. His expression darkened, and every day it became harder to explain. The words felt painfully real because everyone understood them. Small secrets became larger secrets. Delayed conversations became impossible conversations. Problems grew while people waited for better timing. Human beings did it all the time. The difference was that most people's mistakes did not involve something this large. JIMIN finally spoke. "Then why tell me you love TAEHYUNG?" The question immediately shifted the atmosphere. Everyone looked toward Jungkook. Even TAEHYUNG seemed tense because despite everything else, that confession remained the spark that started tonight's explosion. Jungkook closed his eyes briefly. When he answered, his voice carried genuine shame. "Because I didn't know what else to say." JIMIN frowned. "What does that mean?" Jungkook exhaled slowly. "When I got the message, I thought everything was ending." His hands tightened slightly. "I thought the truth would come out before I could explain it." He looked toward TAEHYUNG, and I started thinking about every mistake I made. The overlook fell silent again. Jungkook continued, "Every person I hurt, another glance toward TAEHYUNG, every relationship I complicated." Then his eyes returned to JIMIN. "Every conversation I avoided." The meaning behind his words slowly became clearer. Not immediately, gradually, like pieces falling into place. Jungkook wasn't describing love, he was describing regret. Deep regret. The kind people feel when they realize they are about to lose something important. TAEHYUNG finally understood first. His expression shifted subtly. Then JIMIN noticed, then everyone else. Jungkook laughed weakly. "I spent so much time trying to understand my feelings that I stopped understanding reality." He shook his head. "I confused guilt with love." Silence. Complete silence. Even the wind seemed to disappear because those words changed everything. JIMIN stared at him. TAEHYUNG stared at him. Nobody knew what to say. Jungkook looked exhausted, relieved, broken, honest, all at once. TAEHYUNG mattered to me. His voice remained steady now. "A lot." TAEHYUNG nodded slightly. He already knew that. But somewhere along the way, Jungkook paused. "I started believing that my guilt meant something else." The admission felt painfully human, painfully believable. Months of emotional confusion suddenly made sense. The distance, the obsession with old memories, the inability to let go. None of it came from romantic certainty. It came from unresolved guilt, from mistakes, from fear. JIMIN felt his heartbeat accelerating. Because for the first time tonight, he could see the full picture forming. Not perfectly, but enough. Then Jungkook looked directly at him. "The reason I broke down wasn't because I still loved TAEHYUNG." Nobody breathed, nobody moved. Jungkook's voice grew quieter, more vulnerable, more honest than it had been all night. I broke down because I thought you were about to leave. The words hit like a shockwave. Jimin froze completely. Across the overlook, nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed capable of speaking. Because suddenly the emotional center of the entire night shifted: the confession, the tears, the panic, the fear. It wasn't about Taehyung. Not really. It was about loss, the possibility of losing someone who had been part of Jungkook's life for so long that imagining a future without him felt impossible. Jimin looked away first, not because he wanted to, because he needed a second to process what he had just heard. His emotions felt impossible to untangle. Anger remained, hurt remained, question remained, yet something else had appeared too: understanding. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. The difference mattered, because understanding opened doors that anger kept closed. Jungkook lowered his gaze. He looked emotionally drained, completely drained. Yet despite everything, despite the honesty, despite the revelations, despite the confessions, one truth still remained hidden. One truth connected directly to the agreement. One truth connected to the people manipulating events from the chateaus. One truth so significant that even now Jungkook had not said it aloud. RM noticed immediately, so did Suga. Their expressions changed almost simultaneously, because they both realized the same thing. The emotional truth had finally surfaced, but the practical truth had not. The agreement still existed, the leak still existed. The people behind it still existed, and somewhere inside all of that was the final piece of the puzzle. The piece that explained why someone had waited over a year to destroy Jungkook's silence. The piece that explained why the rules suddenly changed. The piece that would reveal who was really responsible for everything that happened. And judging by the look that suddenly appeared on Jungkook's face as another notification lit up his phone, that final truth was about to arrive, whether any of them were ready for it or not. The notification appeared at the worst possible moment. Jungkook stared at the screen while everyone watched him. The emotional storm that had consumed the overlook moments earlier suddenly shifted into something else. Tension, unease, anticipation. Whatever was on that phone had changed Jungkook's expression immediately. The color drained from his face, his jaw tightened. Even his breathing seemed different. Noticed first. What happened? For several seconds, Jungkook didn't answer. He simply stared at the screen. Then he laughed once, a short, bitter laugh that carried no amusement whatsoever. Jimin felt a chill move through him instantly. He had heard that laugh before. It was the sound Jungkook made when something had gone very wrong. Jungkook! This time Jimin's voice sounded firmer. Jungkook slowly lifted the phone and looked at everyone standing around him. His eyes carried a strange mixture of emotions: relief, fear, resignation, almost as if he had reached the end of a long road. It's over. The statement confused everyone immediately. Jin frowned. What's over? Jungkook looked back at the screen. Then he finally answered. The agreement. Silence followed. Complete silence. Because despite everything they had learned tonight, the agreement still remained at the center of the mystery. It was the thing that started everything. The thing that shaped every secret. The thing that turned one decision into a year of lies. RM stepped closer. What do you mean it's over? Jungkook turned the screen toward them. The message was short, very short, yet its meaning felt enormous. Agreement terminated effective immediately. No further obligations apply. Nobody spoke for several moments. They simply stared at the message. Then Suga's expression changed. That's it? Jungkook nodded slowly. That's it. Suga folded his arms. After a year? Apparently, Jungkook replied. The answer sounded hollow because it was hollow. A year of sacrifice. A year of fear, a year of isolation, a year of secrets reduced to a single message, a few words on a screen. The unfairness of it settled over everyone immediately. Jimin felt it more strongly than most, because for the first time he could clearly see what this had done to Jungkook. Not just tonight, over time, slowly, consistently, like pressure building inside a sealed room. Jungkook laughed again. I spent a year protecting something that doesn't even exist anymore. Nobody knew how to respond, because what could anyone say to that? There were no comforting words, no easy answers, only reality. And reality looked painful. Taehyung finally broke the silence. Then tell us everything. Jungkook looked at him, then at the others. Then back toward the city lights. The moment had finally arrived. No contracts, no obligations, no conditions, no excuses. Nothing remained between him and the truth now except fear. And after everything that had happened tonight, even the fear felt exhausted. He took a deep breath. The agreement was never about protecting BTS. Everyone immediately looked up. The statement contradicted everything he said earlier. Jimin frowned. What? Jungkook nodded slowly, not directly. He looked ashamed. That's the lie I told myself. The atmosphere shifted again. Another layer, another truth, another painful realization. Jungkook continued before anyone could interrupt. It was about protecting an image. His voice sounded distant. A future people wanted. Arm immediately understood where this was going. His expression darkened. Whose future? Jungkook laughed bitterly. Everyone's. He paused. and nobody's. The answer sounded confusing at first. Then it started making sense, slowly, uncomfortably, because images were powerful. Expectations were powerful. Industries depended on them. Businesses depended on them. Entire careers depended on them. Jungkook looked toward the horizon. There were people who believed they knew what was best. His voice remained calm now, almost detached. People who thought they could control outcomes. Jimin listened carefully. Every word mattered. And they needed cooperation. Jungkook's eyes lowered. They needed someone willing to carry responsibility. Nobody interrupted. The story was finally taking shape. The real shape. Not the simplified version, not the heroic version, the truth. They told me I could help. Jungkook laughed quietly, and I believed them. The confession hurt because it sounded sincere. Completely sincere, there was no arrogance in it, no pride, just regret. Deep regret. J-Hope shook his head slowly. You were alone. Jungkook smiled sadly. That's the problem. Everyone looked at him. I wasn't. The answer surprised them. Jungkook's expression darkened further. I just convinced myself I was. Silence returned immediately. Because now they were reaching the emotional heart of the tragedy, not manipulation, not contracts, not secrets, isolation. Self-imposed isolation. Jungkook had spent a year carrying something he never truly had to carry alone. The realization felt devastating. Jimin felt it especially strongly, because if there was one thing he understood, it was the damage people caused themselves when they refused help. Jungkook finally looked directly at him. You would have helped me. Jimin nodded immediately. Yes, I know. Jungkook's voice nearly broke. That's why I didn't tell you. The answer hit harder than any accusation, because it revealed the contradiction at the center of everything. Jungkook trusted him enough to know exactly what he would do, and that trust became the reason for the secrecy. The logic was flawed. Painfully flawed, yet emotionally it made sense. Too much sense. Jimin looked away briefly. His emotions felt impossible to organize. Part of him wanted to stay angry. Part of him wanted to demand explanations. Part of him wanted to ask why. Yet another part simply felt sad. Sad for the year they lost. Sad for the conversations that never happened. Sad for the burden Jungkook carried unnecessarily. Then RM spoke. Who leaked it? The question immediately changed the atmosphere again. Because despite all the emotional revelations, one mystery remained unsolved. The leak, the messages, the manipulation, the person behind everything. Jungkook's expression hardened instantly. For the first time all night, genuine anger appeared in his eyes, not frustration, not sadness. Anger, real anger, the kind that comes from betrayal. Everyone noticed. Jungkook slowly looked down at the phone still in his hand. Then he opened another file, a file he had avoided sharing until now. A file containing a name, one name. The name of the person who had orchestrated everything from the shadows. The name of the person who waited over a year before deciding to destroy the agreement. The name of the person responsible for turning a private mistake into a public disaster. Jungkook stared at it for several seconds before finally lifting his head, and the moment he spoke that name aloud, every member standing there would realize that the true betrayal in this story had never come from Jungkook at all. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The cold wind swept across the overlook while Jungkook stared at the file on his phone. The tension felt almost unbearable. After everything that had happened tonight, after every secret, every confession, every revelation, they were finally standing at the edge of the final answer. The person behind the leak. The person behind the messages. The person who had manipulated events from the shadows for over a year. Jimin watched Jungkook carefully. What unsettled him most wasn't the anger in Jungkook's eyes, it was the disappointment. Deep disappointment. The kind that only appeared when betrayal came from someone you once trusted. That realization immediately made the situation feel more personal, more painful. RM stepped forward slightly. Who is it? Jungkook closed his eyes for a moment. Then he finally spoke. Someone who was supposed to protect all of us. Silence crashed over the group instantly. The answer wasn't a name, but it was enough to change everyone's expectations. Nobody had expected that. Jin frowned immediately. J-Hope looked confused. Even Suga's expression hardened, because betrayal from an enemy was one thing. Betrayal from a protector was something else entirely. Jungkook opened the file completely. Several pages appeared on the screen: internal communications, meeting records, private correspondence. The kind of information nobody outside a small circle should have possessed. Jimin's heartbeat accelerated. He could tell from Jungkook's expression that these documents were real, not rumors, not theories, evidence, actual evidence. I found out 3 months ago, Jungkook admitted. The statement immediately drew everyone's attention. 3 months? Taehyung repeated. Jungkook nodded. That's when I realized the agreement wasn't being honored anymore. His voice sounded distant. At first, I thought I was imagining things. He laughed quietly. I wanted to be imagining things, nobody interrupted. The story clearly mattered. Jungkook continued. Information started appearing where it shouldn't. Another pause. Conversations people shouldn't have known about. He lowered his gaze, details leaking slowly. RM immediately understood the pattern. Someone had been testing the boundaries, collecting information, preparing, not acting impulsively, planning carefully, deliberately. You knew someone was setting you up, RM said. Jungkook nodded once. Eventually, the answer felt devastating, because it meant Jungkook had spent months watching a disaster approach without knowing how to stop it. Months trapped between silence and exposure, months carrying another secret on top of the first one. Jimin felt his chest tighten. The loneliness of that experience suddenly felt impossible to ignore. Why didn't you tell us? The question escaped before he could stop it. Jungkook smiled sadly. Because every time I tried, I convinced myself I could fix it first. The answer hurt because it sounded exactly like him. Too much responsibility, too much pressure, too much belief that he had to solve problems alone, Suga finally spoke. And you couldn't. Jungkook shook his head. No. For once there was no shame in the admission, just acceptance, complete acceptance. He looked down at the screen again. Then he finally turned it toward them. Nobody expected what they saw, because the file did not contain a single mastermind. It did not contain a secret enemy. It did not contain a shocking villain waiting in the shadows. Instead, it revealed something much more realistic, much more painful, a network of decisions, conversations, people protecting themselves, people protecting careers, people protecting reputations. Nobody had created the disaster alone. Multiple people had contributed to it. Multiple people had benefited from the silence. Multiple people had chosen convenience over honesty. RM stared at the documents quietly. The realization settled over him almost immediately. This wasn't a story about one evil person. It was a story about a system that encouraged secrecy, a system that rewarded silence, a system that convinced young people to carry impossible burdens by themselves. Jungkook noticed the understanding forming on RM's face. Now you see it. Nodded slowly. Yeah. His voice sounded heavy. I do. The others began reaching the same conclusion, piece by piece, detail by detail. The truth wasn't simple. It never had been. There was no single villain to blame, no single moment where everything went wrong. Instead, there were dozens of small choices, small compromises, small fears, small silences. Over time, those small things became something much larger, something destructive. Jimin stared at the documents before looking back at Jungkook. Suddenly, the anger he had carried for hours felt different. Not gone, but transformed, because now he could see the full picture. Jungkook had made mistakes, serious mistakes. Yet he had never acted out of malice, never acted out of selfishness. Every terrible decision started from the same place: fear, responsibility, protection. The intentions did not erase the damage, but they changed how the damage felt. Jungkook looked exhausted, completely exhausted, as if speaking the truth had drained the final reserves of energy he possessed. I kept thinking there would be a right moment. His voice sounded quieter now. A perfect moment, he laughed weakly. Turns out those don't exist. Jimin almost smiled despite everything, because that lesson felt painfully familiar. Life rarely provided perfect timing. Difficult conversations remained difficult regardless of when they happened. The only difference was the cost of waiting. And waiting had cost them all a lot. Several seconds passed. Then something unexpected happened. Taehyung stepped forward first. Not Jimin, not RM. Taehyung. He stopped directly in front of Jungkook. The two looked at each other in silence. Months of tension existed between them, maybe years. Complicated emotions, misunderstandings, regret. Then Taehyung spoke. You're an idiot. The statement shocked everyone, including Jungkook. Then Taehyung shook his head. A complete idiot. For a second, nobody knew how to react. Then something surprising happened. Jungkook laughed. A real laugh, small, brief, exhausted, but real. It was the first genuine laugh anyone had heard from him all night. Taehyung pointed at him immediately. Don't laugh, Jungkook laughed again. This time J-Hope smiled, then Jin. Then even Suga looked slightly less serious. The tension cracked. Not completely, but enough. Enough for everyone to breathe again. Enough to remember that despite everything, they were still standing together. That realization mattered more than anyone wanted to admit. Yet even as the atmosphere softened, Jimin noticed something. Jungkook still looked uneasy, still looked like someone waiting for another blow, another problem, another consequence. And deep down, Jimin knew why. Because exposing the truth did not automatically heal the damage. The agreement was over, the leak was explained, the secrets were finally exposed, but trust was different. Trust took longer, trust required choices. And as Jungkook looked toward him again, uncertainty visible in his eyes, it became clear that the most important question of the night still remained unanswered.